Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for having me, everyone. Massive thanks and props to Renee for driving this inclusive and psychologically safe bus. And wow, Joseph, I am totally gripping my hands on my hacky sack right now. So hopefully my authentic, resonant voice doesn't break during this session. But seriously, thank you. What a great session to listen to before presenting. I'm so aware of my voice right now. So I'm going to take a breath. So yes, I'm Caz, and as the intro said, I have had the privilege to work with a lot of different people in different places, which has taught me probably the most I have been able to learn and garner about trauma-informed practice by sitting and talking and working with people face to face, more so than what I've maybe learnt in books. And I guess before I kick off, what is important to me is sort of joining the lived experience stories, the professional experience, and then kind of spitting it out into practical guidance that kind of might work for folks that are late diagnosed ADHD or ADHD. So I'm a counsellor for both. Those who are thinking about diagnosis, those who are caring for or living with someone who is ADHD. Yeah, hopefully this kind of spans across lots of different people, not just, the people in the room who have an ADHD brain. So the influences that I'll draw on here are that of my own experience and the stories of the identified people that I've worked with over the years. So about 7 years working with neurodivergent children, youth, and adults. Accessibility wise, I love that I don't have to say much about this. It's already been covered so many times, but if you need to stretch, turn your camera off, knit a sweater whilst you're listening, do whatever you need to do. I'll take it as a compliment. If you can hold up a watercolor after this, that would be cool. No pressure though. And asking questions is an access need for some folks. So jump in if you do have a question. Otherwise, I'll do my best to answer them at the end. So we're covering ADHD in women, late diagnosis, hormones, burnout. These are a lot of on-topic kind of things that are crossing over into the wellness space. And information is sort of rife around these topics at the moment. So we're just going to navigate through this together. They are my special interests. So I'm got a timer set so I don't run over and go into side quests. Okay, that's it. Let's move on. So ADHD, funny name, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I feel like the words deficit and disorder kind of, I don't know, make it sound like it really sucks and that it's something to be fixed. It's absolutely not. It's a lifespan condition. It's a complex neurodevelopmental difference, I guess, if we're thinking about definitions here. It's a difference that affects the way that people think, feel, behave, perceive the world, and it's highly genetic. 1 in 20 Australians have a diagnosis of ADHD, and that's just those that have the resources to actually have a formal diagnosis. And at the moment, it's really tricky to have the capacity to get a diagnosis. So that number's probably maybe double, maybe triple. But women, the female kind of expression of ADHD is a bit different to what we might see in men. It's quieter in women. It's less visible, but no less real. And it can show up a lot internally, that internal chaos kind of masked by external composure. On the outside, it looks like I've got everything together, but inside it's like a vortex of swirling emotions, feelings, thoughts, rumination, anxiety, all of these things. It's missed deadlines, despite the best of intentions. It's conversations interrupted by racing thoughts. It's interrupting someone when they're talking, even though you are desperately wanting to understand them, because you don't want to forget the thing that you're about to say, because you want that person to know that you're listening and that you find them interesting. It's a body that never quite settles, emotions that feel sharp, out of control, and sometimes like they're turning on you. And so it can feel overwhelming, I think, when mostly from the outside, we're trying very, very hard to have it all together. And to have that, I don't know what you see on social media and stuff, but like the woman who can do it all. Is you can have the career, you can have the family, you can have the side hustle, you can have a candle making business, you can also be a marathon runner. All of these things, a bit unsustainable. I don't know if it helps us move forward, but ADHD in women also co-occurs with other challenges such as anxiety, depression, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD, disordered eating, addiction challenges, invisible illnesses. It's never rarely sits on its own, ADHD. It can be, yes, it's messy, but it's also brilliant when it's well supported. So really, we just need spaces that let our kind of magic show up without needing to apologize for it. And ADHD energy, it's tidal. Sometimes the tide is in and sometimes the tide is out, and it changes day to day, like the tide. And I'm so happy that I live near the beach, because the beach is like, girl, you're cool. You got a tide just like me. I'm like, thank you, beach. Thank you, ocean. Feels kind of like I'm being seen. But it's about working with the tide rather than against it. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So the landscape of late diagnosis, it seems to some from the outside, looks like, doesn't everybody have ADHD? You know what? That's a conversation for another time. But what we do know is that in Australia, ADHD diagnosis in women aged between 35 and 55 have increased dramatically in the past 5 years. I have a client who is 69 years old. She got diagnosed at 67. She's trying to figure it out now and make sense of her life all the way up to that point. In Australia, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, PBS, data shows us that ADHD meds increased from 3,569 in 2014 to 40,911. Hopefully, I'm not great at reading numbers off the screen, in 2023. So that's a ridiculous rise in people accessing medication for ADHD. And this late bloom of diagnosis reflects decades of under recognition in a few key areas. The first one is gender bias. So I think it was the amazing ladies at Aspect who mentioned the diagnostic criteria being based on young boys, I think, for autism. It's the same with ADHD. Our diagnostic criteria doesn't really look at what maybe the female expression really is and the differences, and it certainly doesn't take into consideration the hormonal landscape, which is completely different to the male physiology. Men have a 24-hour hormonal cycle. Women have a 28-day-ish hormonal cycle. Very different. So women are 3 times less likely to receive a diagnosis because of that. The second point is referral bias. So when symptoms are gendered expectations of good behavior, a good girl, she sits still, she's quiet, etc. Because the female experience of ADHD is often internalized, you can't see. She's not climbing up the walls. She's not, well, I did run around like a horse on all fours until I was in prep. So like, okay, maybe that's an outline on the graph. But what that means is that there's delayed recognition and access to support for women until later in life, generally when the wheels fall off from a hormonal perspective. We drop the mask, whether we want to or not. The last reason is symptom expression and masking. So I sort of talked about that just now, but girls present with inattention, emotional sensitivity, and perfectionism, really. And those are misread as personality traits rather than neurodevelopmental signs or delays. So we're sort of learning to mask quite early on. Be a good girl, sit down, don't ask for things, don't be loud. So that's kind of where we're at. The house of hormone mirrors, because it feels like you're in a house of mirrors, I think. Myself, diagnosed at 37, I'm into my 40s now, and so really this is kind of where a lot of women are finding themselves. What's the hormonal impact we're talking about? So perimenopause, which starts at 40, can start at 40, and menopause, which is generally going to hit early 50s. I think it's 51 is the average age for menopause. Basically, what happens is they cause estrogen to bail on the picture of your life in your body. And because dopamine is easily influenced by estrogen, dopamine decides to leave the party as well. We're going to look at a graph in a second just to make sure that we really hone in on this. But basically what happens is, like, declining estrogen means dopamine gets wobbly. Dopamine is your neurotransmitter that's going to be all about motivation, drive, focus, etc. I want to achieve a goal, so I'm going to go and do it. You need dopamine to be on your side. So basically it's like your brain's Wi-Fi signal keeps dropping out during peak hours, and progesterone, which is part of the female physiology, she used to be your chill friend and now she's ghosting you. So hormonally, we're set up for chaos. And many women report that the strategies that used to work just suddenly fail in their 40s. It's not a moral failing. It's a biological situation. But sometimes we don't know that. We don't have the information to understand and create meaning that is hopeful and relevant to the situation that we're going through. I just also want to mention here that any hormonal, like major hormonal shift for a woman can trigger these challenges. And I just want to point importantly to the challenges that ADHD women may face during the postnatal period. I'm not a parent. I have a fair few clients, friends, that this hit hard for them, and the coping capacity for women after giving birth was a significant challenge. I just want to call that out, and I'll send some resources through if you want to go on that deep dive on that topic. But what this kind of means is, I haven't even done my slides, why this possibly sucks. There we go. Estrogen and friends are essential for executive function, emotional regulation, and motivation. What may happen to a woman as a result? Cognitive challenges, slower processing. So you might kind of have that brain fog. Where's that word? I find it now when I teach yoga, I can't tell you whether I'm a hand or a foot, etc. It's really showing up for me when I'm cognitively trying to talk about what I'm doing. Fatigue, sleep issues, body pain. This is what happens as a result of our hormones starting to basically leave. So sleep, which is one of the biggest ways to manage your ADHD effectively, is really impacted by this. The last part is the heightened stress and anxiety and negative self-talk. So this is when that rumination piece, that internal rumination piece, can start to kick off. And in the workplace, the fluctuations hormonally and the impact on ADHD might look like feeling scattered or forgetful in meetings, struggling to meet previous performance standards. Like, I used to be awesome at this. I used to be able to get things done really quickly, and now I just can't. Increased emotional exhaustion and overreacting to feedback. We'll talk about RSD in a tick, rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Take a breath. And a sense of not feeling like yourself anymore. these type of internal landscapes can really erode confidence and increase burnout risk. It feels like some days I'm, confidently leading a meeting, able to stay on task. And then the next day, I'm pretty sure I'm deciding whether or not I should become a beekeeper or not. And it's like, whoa, you should be doing this. You should be doing your accounts. Instead, you're looking at what are the best hive setups for the backyard. It's the capacity fluctuates, the focus fluctuates over and above what is already difficult. Perimenopause feels like your brain is running on Windows 95 on 2% battery. So there's a lot of pop-ups and no updates, So for those who love a graph, I would love to point you to, this is what the female cycle looks like, okay? So we're talking from day 1 to day 28. Day 28 being your average. It's definitely not, it's just a number. It can be a little bit shorter or longer than that. But what we're looking at here, the cool part, is to find the orange line, which is estrogen. And you can see from day 1 to day 14, which is where ovulation happens. And basically, estrogen is the Beyonce of the hormones, okay? She's like, hey girl, let's get you out. Let's get you socializing. You really want to, you're feeling really capable. You're feeling really excited. Everything's feeling great. You're really sparkly. Hopefully you go out, you meet someone. Maybe it all goes well. From an estrogen perspective, she's like, hopefully you can procreate in some way, shape or form. And then she's like, I'm out. My job's done. And she pisses off for the rest of the cycle. The last 2 weeks means estrogen's kind of not really appearing in your life. That means dopamine's not really appearing in your life. So you can see here the kind of symptoms that come up from day 14 to day 28. We're talking hyperactivity, impulsivity, risk-taking. I have women that share stories that like clockwork. Around that ovulation, they're doing some stupid stuff. They're like, I'm going to buy 3 e-bikes and then, decide to start an e-bike company. Some really, maybe you could call it unhinged. You could call it maybe not well thought through stuff happening. And then as you're getting closer to that 28-day part, this is where other stuff is going to come in. Some of those addictive behaviors, irritability, anxiety, mood sometimes people feel like a literal light is turned on and they're a completely different person. We're also talking kind of depression, PMDD, and inattention. PMDD disproportionately affects women with ADHD and autism, and it is PMS on steroids. Essentially, it is a diagnosed mental disorder. It's in the DSM-5. That's how severe and significant it can be. I'll share some resources on PMDD for everyone. Some of the things that might show up for a neurodivergent person, I'm going to say neurodivergent because this is not just ADHD, that the hormones can impact, particularly in this back half of the cycle. So not understanding social cues, needing more time alone, becoming easily overstimulated by noises, partners, the workplace, just the entire world, being snappy and irritable, unable to express yourself. It's almost like, I feel like even as Joseph said, everything gets locked up here in your throat and you can't express yourself. And then suddenly you just snap because you can't kind of share how you're feeling. Reading into things, RSD is a real challenge here. So if this graph shows a normal kind of non-perimenopause situation, what we need to consider is that the luteal phase, day 15 to 28, just become your life. When hormones start to get rattled. The trauma context here is, remember when I said that ADHD is highly heritable, and if you're ADHD, you probably don't remember. So I'll just say it again. ADHD is highly heritable, and that's why women often will receive their diagnosis, because they're going through the process with their child and they're seeing, oh, that happens to me. Oh, that happens to me. Oh, that happens to me. And then maybe someone might say, did you know that ADHD is like passed down generation to generation? So if we're only just making strides in sort of understanding what it looks like in women, ADHD, it would be possible to consider that previous generations, this was not well understood. I definitely can say that my mum was ADHD, but not ever diagnosed or supported with that. And it's part of that kind of exploration of maybe having a late diagnosis is understanding the intergenerational kind of pattern that comes down. So if we can surmise that we're only just making, strides now to support people, support women, that previous generations, this would have been not supported, not understood, not well managed. And so any mental kind of difference, whether that's you're talking about a disability, a mental illness, or anything like that, that isn't well supported and maybe not even believed, is that perhaps people then turn to coping strategies that may not have been helpful. The previous generations may have modeled to the next generation and potentially normalized ways of coping with being a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world, like these are kind of the top 10, using alcohol, substances, or violence to manage emotions, impulsive behavior leading to troubles with the justice system and family members incarcerated. So I think the 2022 data on this is that, actually I've got it written here, ADHD is estimated to be 5 times higher among youth prisoners and 10 times higher among adult prisoners, which is just epic. And when working in juvenile detention and looking at the kids who were in the unit and their diagnoses, pretty much all of them had ADHD, but back then I didn't understand the links between. So other coping strategies that may not have been helpful that previous generations might have leaned on could have been gambling, shopping, leading to troubles financially. So the flow on from that is that maybe there's challenges with basic needs such as stable housing, access to education, health support. So we ponder the flow on effects and where we are now if you're looking at a late diagnosed neurodivergent person, regardless of gender. The other thing I want to say here is that Dr. Michael Jelinek, who is the professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, has estimated that children with ADHD receive as many as 20,000 more corrections on their behavior by the age of 10 than their neurotypical peers, which is just huge. Why don't you try hard enough? Why don't you just apply yourself? Can you sit down, shut up, stop talking, da, 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 da. And if there are ADHD folks in the room, these stories, you may have heard them, I certainly did. Why aren't you living up to your potential? Stuff like that. And basically, when we think about that, this is our trauma context. What does that lead to? A nervous system that's primed for alert because you're constantly in that state of hypervigilance. Am I doing the right thing? Am I responding appropriately? I don't want to get found out for being, not smart enough. So you're constantly in this state of activation. There's that not enough stories and damaging self-narratives about capacity. I didn't go to university until my mid-30s, early to mid-30s, because I believed that I wasn't smart enough to go to university because that's what I was told when I was in high school. So we're hearing this stuff and we're believing it, and we have enough evidence to support that. So our behaviors stem from there. Another one for women is that resting creates guilt. I should be doing more. If I rest, I'm not going to get ahead. I'm not, I'm not sure about the other women in this space and whether this resonates, but yeah, resting can be really difficult for an ADHD person. And yeah, why don't you just relax? It gets said to me sometimes. I'm just like, I'll show you what relaxing is. Sorry, I don't mean to get violent at all. It's just that we try really hard to be relaxed. It's just not our state that we can exist in easily. The last thing to say here is that overfunctioning keeps me safe. So if I keep doing over and above, no one will know how hard I'm trying and struggling, and it's this overcompensation constantly. So what happens? With all of this information that we've got, we're talking about the burnout cycle. So it goes hyperfocus, crash, shame, repeat. Hyperfocus, crash, shame, repeat. You can make a song out of it. So hyperfocus essentially is that if we have trouble modulating dopamine, hyperfocus is when we are often like really engaged with what we're doing, to the detriment of everything else around us. And sometimes those states work really well for us. I made these slides in a hyperfocus. But if that's your default way of working all the time, it's not going to be sustainable. So hyperfocus feels productive, but often it's driven by adrenaline, people pleasing, and perfectionism. Now, running on adrenaline, not dopamine, is like, okay, let's think about the difference. Adrenaline is like dancing on a table at 2 a.m. Dopamine is dancing in your kitchen on a Tuesday, okay? I use this other analogy, which is what it is, but it does make sense to a lot of people. It may make sense to you, but adrenaline is like the dirtier version of dopamine. It's like street quality speed, as opposed to, if we were to think dopamine being clean, other form of drug that is very smooth. They're different. If you're just on adrenaline, you're constantly go, 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 go. The crash is quite epic. So many ADHD women unconsciously rely on adrenaline as a substitute for dopamine. And that means that urgency and deadlines create that stimulation in our brains because it feels good, because we're stimulated and we exist in an understimulated state all the time. So if we perhaps have a job that is a crisis, high crisis type of job. I used to work in event management, the music industry, and in jail, all right? So let's think about that. I essentially was going to work to access that because it made me feel okay. If you are then remunerated and rewarded for that way of working, it gets a little bit shady, because essentially you're setting yourself up to exist in a nervous system state that is constantly in a stress response. The crash. So you've done the hyperfocus, you now crash because you've used all your batteries up, your emotional, physical, social, etc. batteries. It's exhaustion, it's withdrawal, and it's your health flare-ups. So there's always a physical cost to running on adrenaline. It's not sustainable. And once we start to change how we do things to not be that way, life can feel a bit smoother. It takes a little bit of time and titration. The last part is that shame layer, so the repeat. So you've gone through the hyperfocus, you've had the crash, you've now kind of gone into the, why can't I do things like other people? Why can't I just, be capable and not crash and not fall in a shit heap at the end of the day when other people can go and walk their border collies at the beach? Then there's a period of, okay, I'm now just going to lie on the couch, eat chips and watch the Gilmore Girls. And then maybe a couple of weeks later, you're feeling good again and you're seeking that dopamine, you're seeking that stimulation. So you repeat the whole cycle once again. And we have working memory attention kind of shadiness. So we may forget how horrible it felt when we fell out of that hyper focus. And women can exist in this way of working for years until they can't, until hormonally they can't do it anymore. So what does sustainable leadership mean then? If we know all this stuff, there's a few points here, and other people have said some amazing stuff around how maybe we can lead more compassionately and do better and be more informed and be congruent and authentic. I think that any values that are not operationalized into businesses are just tokenism kind of. And Renee, I know she speaks about that, about the posters on the wall, but people actually not walking their talk. So this is some of the stuff that I believe in, and it's just my thoughts. And there's heaps of other options. The first one is unmasking. Like the name of the amazing conference that we're in, dropping the mask. So what that means is that we recognize and name the hidden costs of overfunctioning. So that's perfectionism, people pleasing, masking, exhaustion. But we also know that unmasking can leave us feeling very vulnerable, and it's a practice. So part of the stuff I do with people is that we find ways to safely unmask, and there's always not just one mask, there's heaps of masks. If you're a Gemini, you've got like 50 masks. So like putting down the mask and then putting it back on and putting it down, like you can't just unmask. It's like taking your pants off outside. It's like, if you are not used to taking your pants off outside, it's not going to be a good time for you or for the other people around you. And awareness creates choice. So if we can lead with transparency rather than performance from a organizational level, from all levels really, but if that can be modeled from the top, it's going to be a good time. The second thing is body-based pacing. So sustainable leadership starts with body literacy, like nervous system literacy. So what we've talked about today. The more people know about the stress response and how it shows up for them, the better. Because noticing fatigue, noticing overstimulation, and understanding your energy rhythms, that ADHD is titled, is a way to work with yourself rather than against yourself. So it also means that we're normalizing cyclical energy. That's a big part of body-based pacing. What that means is that we integrate rest, we integrate movement and micro-regulation practices throughout the workday, short walks, stretching, grounded, like dance-offs, etc. And it becomes part of the culture in a workplace. I'm just checking my time. All right, almost there. We want to replace narratives of push through with pause and recalibrate. Like no more sleep when you're dead, no more, what's the one I used to say when I worked in gyms and I don't do it anymore? Oh, no pain, no gain. No, none of that stuff. We don't subscribe to hyperproductive narratives anymore. So body-based pacing means designing work schedules around cycles and times of resilience, and then times when resilience might not be there. Okay. And it's like, it's a more kind way of working. We don't need permission to rest. We need leaders who understand that rest is the revolution and presenteeism is not helpful for anyone. Self-compassion. So we're reframing laziness and disorganization and burnout as signals of us needing to tend to our nervous systems. Burnout is not just exhaustion, it's a nervous system injury, and it can't just be fixed with like 2 weeks off a lot of the time. But this really is underpinned by having compassionate, well-educated leaders. The next one will be systemic shifts. Okay, so we're talking about we redefine what effective leadership looks like. What does it look like? Flexibility, empathy, and relational care alongside productivity, because we can't just go, oh, well, there's no such thing as deadlines and stuff like that. They have to work on the same seesaw. But relational care is like that idea that safety and well-being is built through relationships. It's not through, I tick all the boxes in my job description, therefore I feel safe at work. I find that corporates treat burnout like a battery issue. Take 2 weeks off and recharge. But ADHD and hormonal burnout needs a system, like a systems reset, not a recharge. It means that our brain's threshold for overstimulation has possibly changed, and so must the environment. So returning to the same expectations, multitasking, sensory load, emotional labor without change is like going, hey man, I know you broke your ankle in the marathon, but we're just going to pop a bandage on it and send you back out, and you need to finish the marathon. So it's about promoting repair over performance. And the question is, what would make this sustainable instead of, when will you be back at full speed? Yeah, so it's like, we're not rewarding urgency anymore because it's not helpful. Systemic shifts also need to include, prioritize, and privilege the voices of lived experience. And there's some excellent ideas within the aspect presentation earlier today. The last bit is peer support, like neurodivergence specific support. So that could be, hey, I know that you're going through a particularly tough time at the moment. Here is a neurodivergence specific EAP service, or you go and talk to someone who has lived experience. It's like not just having the mental health, like one size fits all thing and it not working, and then having someone that is feeling like it's their fault that they weren't able to feel okay in the presence of someone who actually wasn't really suited to them at all. All right. So what this means, recognition. It's not just me. There is a physiological reason why things feel so much harder now for women who are going through changes hormonally and who also are neurodivergent. Advocacy. We are encouraging workplaces to normalize menopause, perimenopause, and neurodivergence in leadership. And hope. Late diagnosis isn't the end of the story. It's the plot twist where we finally stop performing and start belonging. The last thing I'll say is that we don't need to mask better. We need relationships and workplaces that can handle the glow. My glow is done. I went a little bit over time. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry for that, Renee. I'm going to stop sharing.
Absolutely no need to apologise, Caz. That was so engaging and informative. So thank you so very much for that. I suspect in the panel we may have lots more questions coming your way. I do have just one question that I wanted to ask you before we do move into our next break. And I wanted to ask what your thoughts were on, what do you think makes it hardest for women to step out of that hyper-focus burnout cycle, and what do you think's something really helpful that we can take away from?
I just want to say it's not easy. I think, as previous speakers have talked about, the fact that we can get locked in a nervous system state that feels safe for us. And if overfunctioning and being in that fight flight kind of space actually feels safe, and you feel valuable and you feel effective there, then moving into safety is going to feel unknown and scary. And so it's about titration. It's like testing out safety, but then going back to your hyper-focus like hole. So that could be trying to slow down, maybe with some like breath work, maybe 5 minutes of breath, or even 1 minute, or maybe trying out a yoga class. Or if you are the type of person and your exercise is high intensity, I used to box and I used to just put myself in a stress response all the time. Try something that's not as intense. Try it through the body first, see how you go, and recognize that there will be days where it's not achievable and days that you can actually have a go at it. And it's just slowly increasing that window of tolerance over time, kindly and compassionately.